Siddamma, your thoughts? How have you experienced ASR?
Yeah, so basically, as you said, right, in services, what happens is you're dictated by the SOW and the business requirement that is already given to us. So there are a lot of constraints. But many a times when you question, that has happened to me. I can give you an example. In one of the biggest retail chains, right, we had this requirement wherein we were supposed to develop for integrating with microservices. So there, what happened was. We landed up trying to integrate it, but we saw that the authentication doesn't work and all those lot of issues, basically because there was this MVC kind of a framework for the APIs, like you have the experience, the system, the process and the system APIs integrating with the external systems. Okay, now what was missed in the actual requirement was the same case, right, wherein anybody could directly hit your API in the middle, because your authentication is only in the starting, but those questions were never asked, right? We assumed, okay, this is what it is, but when in the middle of it, like almost like after the first sprint, in the first sprint we're supposed to just give a basic implementation, not the full-fledged. And when we came up with that question just in the middle, oh, then we figured out, oh, this also has to be done. Then we made those changes and then we went ahead with that. But good, we found that in the middle of at the end of the first sprint. Otherwise, you would just go and put that thing there, and you never know what all issues it would have created. Not just this, there are many such examples where we come across. Missing pieces in the requirements. It's very important to ask questions, but it gets very tricky. Basically, it's very tricky because being in the services, if you are in the client facing, it's a different story. You sit in the workshops and you have a better say. But if
Yeah,
you're at the offshore, you are at the receiving end, because many a times, you might ask questions and they might never get answered, or you might get a very fragmented answer. So that time it is a challenge. Yes.
a very interesting point, right? And the other challenge is, right, uh, kind of relates to what we started of what an architect is supposed to do. Now, technically, as an architect, lot of our time gets absorbed in what should be the JSON structure, what should be the parameter that is passed, and how to debug this code, how to set up this server, kind of a thing. So it's also a question of the whoever is playing the architect doesn't have the mind space to ask this larger question. So in this case, if you look at the deck that we presented, right, it comes under the quality attributes. What is the overall technical strategy, right, of the organization? What is the principles of the client implemented? Can we have a enterprise level document which says how security will work across APIs and REST services? Probably that question at the beginning or somewhere might have helped, but I've not been there in the project, but I can guess that it would have been something like, okay, Siddhamma, client has signed, he wants to see the first MVP in 3 weeks. We actually need 5 developers, but we have got only 2 on board. Can you pitch in and do that coding also so that we can get the MVP done?
2 weeks, 2 weeks. One sprint was 2 weeks. In two
Okay.
weeks, they wanted something working. And that was pretty complex. It was not something that was straightforward, whatever. Yeah, so.
Correct. So that's again another practical challenge, right? So the architectural role, actually nobody is playing that. To Deepak's question, right? Also kind of relates, right? The responsibility of architecture is actually slips through the cracks. And I think that's something as and I kind of tell this, as architects, we have to kind of explain to people what architecture is, all the stakeholders. So when I was with Microsoft, one of the things which I will do in any introductory call with the customer is actually say that, you know what, I am an architect. Okay. And I had a IEEE definition of that. Probably I'll put it into the WhatsApp group. And I'd say, this is what I do as architecture. I look at the different impacts of different things and then I do it. If you want me to write a specific SQL query or tune it, okay, or write a SharePoint web part, I'm not the person to do it. Not that I can't do it, but if I do that, nobody will do the architecture job. If you need somebody to help that, I will get in a consultant. Now in services, it's not that easy, right? So probably I think over a period of time with the stakeholders, we have to continuously educate them. I'm an architecture. I am responsible for architecture. Let me do the architect's job. Let me have a technical subject matter expert who can help me implement that. Then when the mind gets freed, then we have a chance to fight the ASR battle.
But Kumaran, what I feel, right? I'll give you a very, very interesting scenario. In one of the projects, right, one of the companies took almost like close to 2 years to do that project, and they shelved it. They were not able to do it. Finally, it came to another vendor with whom I was working. So we delivered it in a matter of 3 months. Okay, it was integration between two different technologies, and two different as in it was something like IIB and WTX that has to be integrated together. So what happened was the the client himself did not know what he wanted. Client did not know. He wanted to have a common transformation framework which he wanted to achieve. That is all he knew. That was just one liner statement. There
Okay.
was no further details at all. So then what happens was I used to then I was more of a senior developer. I was not an architect, but I used to sit with my architect and we used to discuss things. We used to ask those questions. We churned out multiple questions, and then we came to the point to find out the actual requirement as to how they want to have. They wanted to have a common generic headers, and then they wanted to send that data to WTX, and WTX would do the transformation and stuff like that. So asking those questions, right, we were able to find out what the client wanted. So I was just trying to understand, so what was that the other vendor did that they took 2 years and they shelved it? I mean, they were not able to figure out the solution. So it's very interesting to know. It was a very good engagement wherein you find out that many a times requirements might be a one pager or a two pager from the client, but they may not have all the answers to your implementations. Basically, they will not satisfy your solution queries.
That
So
that
asking those questions becomes very vital.
what you did is actually pretty brilliant, right? Even though you were a developer, right, where we started, you actually played the architect role. So architecture and architecture is a way of thinking. It's not exactly your role itself. So even you though you were a developer, now probably I don't know about that old vendor. Okay, so what they would have done is, if you take the hypercar world, they were action oriented. They wanted results and they started going after it. But unconsciously or subconsciously, you were doing the intention oriented approach. And then you were telling what's the overall intention of the project, what's the larger roadmap. Those questions, when you started asking, it became much clearer, both to the customer and for your team. And I think that's a beautiful thing that you did. So essentially what you kind of did is, instead of looking at technical requirements and implement that, you actually started discovering ASRs. Probably you didn't use that word, you didn't use this
I
thing,
didn't know.
but
I
this
appreciate it now, Kumar, and I really appreciate it now after so many years' experience. Uh, See, I'll tell you, it was not just a design and architectural roadblock. It was also a technical roadblock because the middleware, which we call now IIB, it used to be called WMB then. It itself had a technical block where you could not integrate it with WTX. It had it, so we had to do something out of the box, something that nobody had done in the industry. Literally it had every roadblock that you can imagine, right? And it was amazing. I mean, it's one of the experiences I'd never ever forget. But asking questions is very, very important. Sometimes it doesn't go good with the client, to tell you frankly. It doesn't go good. You get a lot of mouthful for asking
yeah,
questions. You're asking too many things. Looks like you're technically not sound enough when you're asking questions. So it's a
I
very
think
difficult
architecture is
road
closer
to
to
tread.
therapy. So it is you have to behave like a therapist.
Yeah, that's right. And the other person might be going through a lot of pain, right? But you're still supposed to do your job. Yeah.
Yes. So
and I
I think therapy is a very good analogy for helping somebody else,
actually,
right?
yeah,
So
that's a good analogy, right? So a therapist is different from a doctor, right? He kind of
yeah,
understands the context, discovers it more, and kind of comes up with possible solutions. And a therapy is a joint thing. It's not like, what I am telling you, I prescribe something to you.
yes, exactly.
So that's a
So
good
that's why it came to
metaphor.
my mind. This is if you have to it's a question answer session, and it says just like, what does it make you feel, is a common sort of joke for therapists, right? How does that make you feel? Right? So that is the sort of approach architects have to take, probably.
It doesn't feel good at all for
Yes.
the therapist.
No, no. Actually, my answer to that is, it doesn't make the other person feel good is because they don't know the answer, right? And we are searching for those answers, and they themselves don't know it, and so they sort of get exposed in this question answer session. Say, oh, I really don't know why I'm doing this, and actually, a lot of the software vendors would actually refrain from asking this question, is because you may suddenly figure out you really don't need this software, right? So that is a danger you are putting yourself out there in.
And I think I've done a lot of, so there's a CETA P certification, right? So in ISA, if you go there are different certifications. I sit on a board there. And it's a real life thing. There's 5 architects interviewing the mentee. It's a 2-hour thing that goes on, pretty intense. One of the things that we look for is the person who wants to get certified, is he intimidating to the audience? Is he comfortable with himself, with what he knows and what he doesn't know? And I think one thing which I learned as an architect is, instead of telling you don't know, right, how do we make the person feel comfortable? So interestingly, Vincent and Siddamma, one of the reasons why Tiny Magic happened, right, as I tried to develop as an architect, I realized that understanding the psychology and human brains, and how I have to train my brain, how I have to make the other person feel comfortable, all became a necessary skills of an architect. So in fact, like, I was talking to one person who was mentoring, and he's telling, Kumaran, I want to be an architect. And then he said, you know what, I'm basically an introvert. I'm very uncomfortable with being people and talking to people. I said, just be a technical expert. If you clearly say that you don't want to make people feel good, right, and interact with a lot of people and do all this people connection thing, okay, you want to be there in your cubicle, specialize on a technology, focus being a technical expert, help it architect, take that role. I think there are different roles that's needed. It's like Harsha Bogle always kind of inspires, right? He says he is always used to be the runner. He will take that run and get to the non-strikers end. That's his job, to rotate the strike. And he says, I used to do it in commentary also. If you look at it, he will never make a point of view. He will just ask questions and others have to give points of view. So it's okay to play that role. So if somebody is very comfortable with technology, uncomfortable with dealing with people and emotions, and it's hard, right? And somehow you feel, you don't want to improve that. Now anybody can improve it. But if they feel that, then they can take the technical expert role. But the architect role is somebody who can actually deliver happiness. So it's therapy, interesting, therapist role. So I think,
Exactly. It is.
so we train, it's very hard. I found it very hard because especially when you're technically clear, right? And the other person on the other side is talking stupid. Why should I make him feel good? I'll say, bugger, you don't know this technology. It won't be implemented. Why don't you just listen and move on? Okay. But as an architect, you have a moral responsibility not to do that. Somehow you have to make them feel good and still say it cannot be done. So it's a much harder game to play.
No, the best part of that is you have to make them say that, yes, it is not the right thing to do.
you have to kind of make them do that, right? Like,
yeah.
So one of the examples that I kind of say is something like, let's say all of us were in a room and I did this, okay? So kind of I did this, right? What is the thing that you would do? You will reach out and take the pen, correct? But I never told you, please take the pen from me. So this is the analogy I kind of do. An architect is supposed to do that. You're supposed to put it in some way that the other person can actually think they are taking the decision, but actually you're influencing them to take the decision, which is a pretty hard thing to kind of do.
At some level, it is like manipulation, but it's for the good cause.
Correct. Yeah. So it's actually pretty hard or tricky to do something like that. Yeah. Anyway, so I think that was a good discussion. Let me see if I can do one experiment. So this is one thing which I keep trying. You guys have another 5 minutes? we could try one experiment. So, okay, or maybe we'll do it in the next session. Okay, I had to prepare for it. Anyway, thanks for joining. Any closing comments, Deepak, Siddamma, Vincent?
I think it was a very good discussion. I really liked all the things which I heard from Vincent and Siddamma. Their experiences are really valuable to hear.
We can see the bruises in the blood, no?
Yes.
Same here. I like that, the ASRs is a kind of, first time I'm hearing this kind of a term. Yeah, it makes sense. Earlier you ask questions, you're good, later. And the constraints, it's also an interesting area. Thanks for that,
Sure.
both of you.
Siddamma, any points?
Yeah, I think I really value this session, and I learned a new word for an architect, the therapist. and the other tagline along with that, delivering happiness. That's I think it is one of this retail, right? I think it's Domino's is somebody who delivers happiness. What is that?
Ayyo, Siddamma, tiny magic delivering happiness. It's right below our name.
I'm sorry about that. I missed it. Okay.
And also,
Titanic moment.
Also, PMs are project mothers. That's
PMs are
something.
project mothers.
Project mothers, yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks all for joining. See you next fortnight.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kumar. It was a
Good
great
night.
session.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.